Welcome to Conscious Quest, the LA-based podcast where we aim to stay conscious about everything current. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Conscious Quest, the podcast where we aim to be more conscious about everything current. I'm one of your hosts, Sarah Parlow.
I'm Rishi.
And our episode today is about what, Rishi?
Well, we'll be talking about entheogens, which is specifically psychedelics, and perhaps how we can use those to break past whatever it might be, and the dangers in history, perhaps, or wherever the conversation might go.
Rishi, this is something you're very familiar with because you offer one of the entheogens through your clinic as a tool for people struggling with mental health.
That's right. Yeah, we have a clinic called Clear Mind Treatment, and this is not a plug for that clinic, but specifically we work with the people with depression, PTSD, anxiety, and bipolar, and whatever else. Actually, we've had a lot of folks with OCD and some eating disorders, and we're actually going to be branching out into we're getting our license pretty soon by September to help people with addiction issues, alcohol and drug addiction. So that's going to be a very interesting thing. Yeah, we work with ketamine. I think for all those folks out there who are just listening or watching right now, we've been working with ketamine, and so ketamine is a entheogen.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little so all these different ones that you've heard about. Maybe you want to talk about it if you want to explain the difference between LSD, lysergic acid, phenamide, magic mushrooms, psilocybin, peyote, and of course the ayahuasca. But they all fit into this category called entheogen, which is psychedelic. And what that really means is that it elicits a change in cognition, meaning that it could put you in a different state of consciousness than what you're already in. Generally, these medicines, I'll call them medicines for this podcast here, is that they'll either have the neurons in your brain, specifically your frontal lobe, the neurons actually get more excited, and then allowing for greater connection across whatever neuronal pathways. And your thoughts and your emotions ride on these pathways. And so when you have greater excitement, or if you shut down actually other parts and then allow for other neurons to go, you might have a different thought, might have a different insight. And that's what these essentially have all done historically and currently.
It's brilliant. And Michael Pollan is a fantastic author who wrote an entire book about the use of psychedelics, and it's called Change Your Mind, or How to Change Your Mind. And he really, like you said, Rishi, talked about one specific part of the brain that shut down during the course of psychedelic therapy, and that is the default mode network, which is this sort of filter, which filters out a lot of the stimulation that we're taking in, and it kind of narrows as we get older. So we're really only seeing like a fragment of what's happening at any given time. And it's just a survival mechanism, really, for our brains to be more, I guess, efficient. It's an evolutionary thing. So when you're reducing that filter and reducing blood flow to that filter part of the brain, you're absolutely, you hit it on the head. The other parts of your brain can light up and really create connections where there weren't before. And it's a really incredible thing. It's probably the closest thing we have in the modern age to having what might be called a mystical experience on demand. It really echoes what a lot of sages and advanced spiritual adepts in history described when they were in the contact of the divine. Maybe on some level, they were tripping themselves.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. And Michael Pollan and of course, like so for instance, what you're talking about, the sages of the past, well, the use of psilocybin has gone back for thousands of years. And there's even a painting, I think in I don't know if it's Mesopotamia or Samaria, where they call it the Mushroom Man. And you can look it up. You don't have to believe me right off the bat, but the Mushroom Man is sitting there. It's almost 6,000 years old. It's a long time. Right? And he is completely, he looks like a shamanistic type of portrait, and I wish I had this for you. And then he's completely covered in these mushrooms, mushroom caps. And it's a specific type of mushroom that, can give you the psilocybin effect. So people have known about it for quite some time, and uh, I don't know. It's interesting. So I wanted just what you said reminded me as well in regards to the shutdown of different pathways. And as we get older, so people don't out there unless you've read my bio. So again, I work in a clinic, and we have lots of folks in, but the psychological clinic. What happens when you get older is, remember, your pathways as you get older, they become, you start to use the same pathways over and over. And the more that you use a certain pathway, and when I talk about pathway, I mean neuronal pathway, that particular pathway gets stronger and stronger and thicker, and
Mm-hmm.
then you tended to go down the same path again and again. It's like a groove. Imagine like a deep groove on like a stone or something, and
Mm-hmm.
and eventually, that's what you'll be walking on, or going through. All the water will be. And when you're a child, so children, they have a flat, like the concrete surface or whatever, it's kind of flat, and
Mm-hmm.
there is no grooves, and so they can go anywhere, right? And so they can actually create new pathways, which is why children are amazing at learning new things. They can learn new languages, they can pick up new musical instruments, they can pick up new skills, and as you get older, try to learn a new language. It's more difficult because of the grooves and the pathways that they have. So some would say, and just to kind of, yeah, I don't mean to just take up the space all on this, but when you take an entheogen or psychedelic, um, perhaps, and I'm not saying that it's a surefire thing, because nothing's surefire, but you have a tendency, I should say, to open up new pathways, maybe, and to allow for new learning or for new insight. And that's primarily what all these do.
And so there's a lot of research that's emerged in recent years. So, Rishi, like you said, ceremonially, things like mushrooms and ayahuasca have been used for hundreds of years in the past by indigenous peoples. And there was a period in the United States history where psychedelics were being utilized a lot in the 60s. And then there was a whole campaign and demonization of them. And there was actually a law passed, I think in 1970, Congress passed the Controlled Substance Act, and they really shut down the use of entheogens. And really only in recent years has it been reemerging in studies, and new research has come out, and it's really fascinating, the results of this research. And it includes things like how it can be a treatment for intractable depression, how it can help to treat PTSD or OCD. And what's also striking is the fact that sometimes it's only one ceremony or one dose of the medication, and then a lot of these symptoms that people are dealing with can resolve, which is in contrast to a lot of these chronic big pharma medications that are out there. And I often wonder if maybe there's not a little bit of a conspiracy there. The big pharma wants to keep selling you like Prozac and things, and why would they want people to use these medicines, these plant medicines that come from the earth, in order to really help them heal from past traumas?
I mean, conspiracy or not, the reality is that there are these medications out there, and they're underutilized, and they're
Yeah.
understudied. And again, I can't speak to the larger picture. I don't know what the board members are actually making decisions on, etc. I do know that there is, for instance, to speak on your point, there's a treatment called TMS, which is not a entheogen. I'm not going to go too much into it, but it's a 36 session or 6 week treatment on a daily treatment, and you receive a magnetic stimulation to your frontal lobe,
Hmm.
actually the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is right there. And it can reverse depression in up to 50 to 70% of people.
Wow.
However, but that's it, and then all of a sudden you're good. But then you're not taking the Prozac. I've met so many people who've come into the clinic who've been on different SSRIs and this different psychopharmaceuticals for decades and decades and decades. And I don't have anything like I don't personally don't have, I think I think maybe if you're not seeing the results that you're needing, because I do believe that they do work. They're studied, and and there's lots of availability for the studies, and side effects are known, etc. Why not try something different? I do believe in psychopharmaceuticals, and I'm not one of those people who are just like. And I've met people who come to the clinic who, when this is interesting, they're like, there's some people, lots of people actually come over and they don't want to use SSRIs
You're right.
and they don't want to use these other things, but why not? They do work. Have you tried them? And some folks who I've met, and they're completely bonkers without their medication, and they're just using just ketamine, and they're using just CBT, and there's some things I honestly don't think can psilocybin, like these entheogens can help, and
Yeah.
I've seen it just based off. I think bipolar, for instance, is a literal thing that cannot be controlled with just meditation. Like there's something like there's a real neurological thing going on with that, and I think that there's other things. But to piggyback on the last, with one result, so there's this one study or one case that I read about, and it was like a woman who was raped. Actually, I'll just say it like that. She was raped, and she was a mother, right? So she had extreme, and she couldn't get past it, and but she didn't want to be touched by her
Mm.
husband, by her children, and then I haven't listed this in entheogen, but she took ecstasy,
Mhm.
MDMA, underneath the control. It was a study, and it wasn't just on her own, and then it broke through one dose of that.
So,
Those results. Go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, and so that's really the magic of psychedelics is the sometimes repetitive negative thought loops that can actually be broken and sort of um, resolved through a one-time use of an entheogen. Um, so my personal story is under the care of a doctor. I did have some ketamine infusions years ago, and the experience that's interesting about ketamine is like you were talking about SSRIs, Rishi, and sometimes things like that can take weeks or maybe a month or two to really peak in their effect and to have the benefit that you're looking for. Something like ketamine, you immediately have this sort of uplift as soon as the treatment is over. And it's something that lasts for a number of days afterwards. I'm hard pressed to say, if it lasted for months, like some people claim. Maybe they do. Um, and my personal experience is that, yes, like you mentioned earlier, with all the connections that are happening in the frontal lobe, thoughts, memories, there seems to be an ability in this space of these medications where you can brainstorm better ways to heal or resolve certain things of the past. And that is really incredible. Um, I will say that my overall experience with ketamine is I think it really did help in forming those different connections and opening up my mind to moving through whatever I was going through with depression or PTSD. But I also really advocate, like you mentioned, about just multidisciplinary means in order to get the optimal result and not to rely on just simply a medication alone if you have other options to explore, like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, or like you mentioned, TMS.
Oh my God, yeah. No, I think like if you can add, that's like the thing. Like uh, this is an analogy I use often, especially with my males who come in, because in our country, in the United States, there's like especially for alpha male types and the folks who go into the military and the folks who go into firefighting and all those things, and people who have these self images of themselves.
Hmm.
There's a big stigma, but the analogy I use often for those kind of guys who come in, I use it where if you're going to be working out, so if you're working out, you can't just do one type of workout. You have to
Mm.
kind of use multiple things. If you're going to be doing get your arms big. You want to have big, 16-inch arms, whatever, hanging out underneath your football jersey. Then you need to then uh, do whatever, like do different things. You have to do that, and that's the same thing with your brain. Your brain is just like any other organ, and if you think that there's a one and done, in my experience, over the past 5 years actually working with ketamine, that's not the case. You have to hit it. If you really want to change, then you really need to go for it. Otherwise, the change won't happen. The wonderful thing about our brain, and also like the negative thing about our brain, is that we're very uh, whatever we learn, we'll stay with, right? And so we'll go back to the same baseline.
Mm.
So you might feel better, and that's the thing about ketamine. And so it's like if you blow up your, for instance, if you go out to, I met people who've gone out to different raves, and they've had this wonderful weekend and used a lot of ketamine and used a lot of other things, and they've come and have like this feeling of this high euphoria, but then they kind of get back to their baseline eventually.
Right.
And that's like my point is that you have to combine it and have those long time changes.
And so, how has it been for your patients? What results have they seen?
Oh, for ours, yeah.
Hmm.
I think that the ones who are true blue, the ones who actually are definitely committed, they're the
Yeah.
ones who see the benefits. I remember, I can't name names, but we had one a few years ago, and she was in it. She came to every single group therapy. She came to all of her psychotherapy sessions, and she uh, came to all of her appointments on time, TMS, and then combined with the ketamine. And I mean, she had some issues going on, and some really kind of just frightening things that happened to her.
Mm.
And eventually, she broke free from her depression. She became a new person almost, and so she said. And that's because she committed. And the ones who just kind of stick around and kind of just dip their toe in the treatment, they don't really. They're the ones who are disappointed. They're like, "This isn't working." I'm like, well, of course it's not working because you're barely doing anything. You have to put the work in. If you're going to eat a big meal, you better be able to do the dishes too.
So commitment is everything in all
Yeah,
facets of life. I love
that's right.
that. um, so there is a lot of really interesting history with entheogens, like you mentioned, going back, hundreds of years. There's even some theories I've
That's
seen,
thousands of years, thousands.
thousands of years. I've
Let's
seen
add a zero to that.
lots of years, and there were even theories that I've seen about Moses on Mount Sinai with the burning bush, that it might have been an entheogenic plant that was on fire, and him inhaling the fumes caused him to have a vision of God. um,
Yep.
and who knows, right?
We'll never know.
We'll
But
never
yeah,
know.
it could be true. That sounds plausible. I mean, it's not without, outside the realm of possibility. Why wouldn't it? Like a lot of those folks, especially in the ancient times, they didn't know anything. I mean,
Yeah.
they didn't know anything about science. They thought there's gods taking the sun and moving it across. The sun itself was a god and would go across the path, of the sky, and there's people living on mountains, and causing thunder and rain. And I don't know. Yeah, I
It's
mean, like
wild.
it is wild.
So, where do you think the future is for the use of entheogens and psychedelics? Do you think it can be something that becomes mainstream? Because honestly, in parts of the country, it is being decriminalized. Psilocybin is now decriminalized, I think, in Oakland, California, in parts of Colorado. So, we're removing some of the stigma around the use of these agents, which also we should point out have a very good safety profile in general. You can't really die from taking psychedelics. They're not necessarily psychologically addictive, or they're not physically addictive. Maybe some people would get psychologically addicted to just having them.
You can become reliant, just like the same thing with like of using cannabis or something or CBD to
Hmm.
go to sleep, and you don't need it, but somehow you you start becoming dependent on it psychologically. Where do I think the future is?
Yeah.
I think it's going to be legal. I think it's going to be legalized, but it's going to take effort. I think that there's a lot of studies that still need to be done. So maybe my guess is within a decade. It's not going to be quick. It's going to be within a decade, maybe the first state. Within, I think it maybe by 2030, I'll just say it like that. Maybe the first state will have a legalized. But there's a lot of problems that are attached with legalization of these type of substances, like who gets to prescribe it. So there's
Hmm.
a lot of committees that have to come up there, and that we can see that in California through the Department of Cannabis, which is hilarious to me. If you actually go to the website of the Department of Cannabis, there's a big old pot leaf, and it's a legitimate department of cannabis.
Crazy times we're in.
Yeah, so a lot of these things have to be thought out, and then it brings other types of like who farms it, who develops it, like who's allowed. So there's a lot of questions about who has a right to it at that point. Whether you can grow your own. Um, is that legally legal? How much of the actual psychoactive molecule should be in it? How do you test for that? Who's testing it? Who's certifying it? Where do taxes go? There's a lot of questions here.
And I think a big thing to really point out is that these substances are most beneficial when you have some sort of degree of integration afterwards, where with a therapist or with in a ceremony circle, that you can have some dialogue, some discussion about what your impressions were and how you can integrate the things that you felt during your session. And I think that's a really important part of the use of these substances, and maybe that's something that we need to have a model for in the future.
I agree. I think there's a lot of people out there already, who come over and just want to use the molecule. And it's just, I have one, without naming names, I have several people actually in the program in the past, I'll say it like that, who all they wanted, they were very focused on on the
Yeah.
molecules that they were taking, without actually going into the therapy, and I don't like the word therapy. I wish there was another word because that has a stigma attached to it because
Mhm.
it is therapeutic and it's a fine word, in English language. There has to be a different way to convey that therapy is more like learning skills, coping skills. It's learning um, self-awareness, these techniques that you can use and employ on your own mind, right? The mind it is noble to only you, and so you, as like the person behind it all, has to go then and then check it out, thought by thought or feeling by feeling, and then use these different techniques through CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. It could be through EMDR, actually, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which helps someone reprocess old trauma, and to turn it into something that's less strong. So it's not going to affect you. That's specifically for PTSD type of stuff.
Hmm.
And there's all these techniques, and if you just focus on, I'll just say it like this, and again, I don't mean to just take the conversation, but I
Perfect.
wanted to put this out there, and this is something I just want to keep on saying. Maybe if someone else will pick it up and repeat it, and maybe this will be out there. So, sir, let me ask you, what was the last highest math you took
The
ever?
the last what?
Highest math?
Oh, calculus.
Which one?
Calculus 1 for my freshman year in college a long time
You just
ago.
took, you just took Calc 1?
Calc 1. Yeah.
Okay. So let's say I asked you, so I want you to do a differential for me. Okay, I want you to take a differential of this problem. It's a differential problem. You
Hmm.
have integer this and then minus this. And I want you to then it's a Calc 3 problem. Okay.
Okay.
I want you to focus on this problem and I want you to go to sleep. Okay. And I want you to come up with a solution when you wake up.
Okay.
Do you think you can do that?
I'd probably be panicking all night long.
All right. Probably not. Probably not. It's like the same thing when you take a psilocybin or a mushroom or entheogen, and you're trying to solve a problem that you may not have the tools to solve,
Hmm.
right? and then you're going to go to sleep, or take this medicine and try to solve these things without having knowledge somewhere floating around in there to integrate, or
Yes.
to put together and synthesize this new solution for yourself because you never heard it before. Right? And
Makes a
that's the
lot of
same
sense.
thing.
Hmm.
Does that? Yeah, okay, good. Yeah. It's like one I've been thinking about. That's kind of an interesting thought. But it's like this. It's so people, they can use CBT
Hmm.
by themselves. Even I don't even care where they're getting it from, like with a therapist, or maybe it's through an app, or maybe through YouTube channels, or maybe just go get a book out there, and then learn these different techniques to deal with your emotions, and then maybe take the medicine, and then see if that's going to kind of float in and kind of solve your problem for you. A lot of folks, I'll just reiterate, will take the medicine and hope somehow miraculously you're going to get it. So it's like the same way you're not going to solve a Calc 3 problem by going to sleep on it for how
That's
many days,
agreed. And life would be so easy. And it reminds me of a quote that I think is by Einstein, someone who said, the answer cannot be solved at the level at which the problem was created. In other words, you have to dig deeper into the well to find the solution for
Makes
things.
sense. Yeah, wow. I forgot about that one. That's a good one.
And,
Yeah,
humans are lazy creatures. We love to take mental shortcuts or heuristics and things like that. And it just, saves our brain cells. But in the end, the path to being aware and conscious is one of continual effort, but also continual reward, I believe.
of course. Yeah, 100%.
So, entheogens are one tool on the path to consciousness, but in and of themselves, they're not enough without us doing the additional work that needs to be done.
Yeah, it's this reading, being self-aware, learning about the world, reading, just read. Go out there and learn as much philosophy from all these other folks, and learn as much knowledge as you can, and then you'll see your brain will naturally put it together.
Hmm.
It's the last thing I want to just mention. I remember I had a really wonderful conversation with a Jesuit priest, and
Wow.
he was a really smart guy. I think he had a master's degree, and but he was really committed. I mean, he was in it. This is his lifestyle. And I talked to him about other religions, and I'll just tell you, the ones who are really in it and are studying and they understand, they all say the same thing, which I've noticed, which is all paths lead to the same peak.
Hmm.
All paths on the mountain lead to the same peak.
I just got tingles. I mean, it's such a reassuring thing to hear that whatever pathway we're on to finding it, it's all okay. Um, I don't think that the reemergence of the psychedelic phenomenon could have come at a better time. We're currently facing in the world just an or an endemic of loneliness. It's a difficult time for people. We have so much advancement in technology, and at the same time, it also isolates us. And the need is there, I think, for connection, and a lot of people are just really struggling with how to make it. Um, do you find that um, the mental health struggles you see are, um, specific to one gender or one age group or whatever, or what are you saying? It's kind of global.
It is. It's everyone's suffering. Everyone's suffering. I do have noticed that it's a lot, people younger and younger age. We're getting a lot more inquiries for
Mm.
younger and younger kids, and I think maybe I'll take it back. It's not. It is endemic. I think everyone is suffering. We have a lot of folks in their 20s and going all the way up to their 50s and even 70s. But what I have noticed, and this breaks my heart, or actually maybe it's good. Maybe people are, but there's a lot of young kids who are coming into the program, and I feel that your childhood and your adolescent years should be just carefree. Your rent's paid for. You
Hmm.
know, you don't really have a job. And you can just go out and go learn. And a lot of folks are really kind of just. Um, I hate to see kids with like a lot of cutting.
Yeah.
We had like one person in our program, and just she was wearing shorts, so it's impossible to not see, but you can see all the way up from little bit above her knee, like very specific, like cuts going all the way up into her shorts. Uh, and that's from like self-harm behavior.
Yeah.
And you can see that a lot. So I feel like maybe the COVID-19 kids who maybe they suffered more. I have to go look at the stats. I just know there's a lot. There's been an uptick of suicide actually in the last couple
Really?
of years as well. Oh
Okay.
yeah, across the board. And that's like, what's it's funny is that we don't really talk about that as a nation. It's one of it is psychology's emergency, but it's actually on the top. I can't remember what number it is. It's definitely within the top 10
Hmm.
of causes of death. There's automobile accidents and heart disease, but suicides there, and certain populations do suffer a lot more of that. For instance, in the military,
Yeah.
there's a lot of suicides, certain professions. But yeah, children actually younger and younger. That's hard to see. That's hard to
God.
watch.
Yeah, and it's hard to be a kid these days. There's a lot of pressure on them. And it is interesting that, we have physical education classes all through grade school and high school, but where do we ever make space for mental health classes, for
No,
really
definitely,
giving, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, definitely not in Florida. That's
Yeah,
for sure.
or Texas. But yeah, more Florida, agreed. But imagine if we were able to give kids at a young age these tools, whether it be meditation or mindfulness, or, there's even a lot of benefit to things like tapping, which is a method of like tapping to distract yourself from a lot of repetitive mental loops. Um, Imagine what kids could do with these in light of how stressful life is today and the pressures that are on them.
Yeah, that's a more kind of a question about whose responsibility is and so what we as Americans have, I think it's a failure, to be honest, for mine, but we as Americans believe it's the parents. But then these parents don't know what they're doing. You don't need a license to become a parent. Anyone can become a parent, and then you have kids raising kids or childlike people, who never really reached past an adolescent maturity standpoint, raising kids. And what do they know? What could they teach them? Nothing. Well, no, I take that back, but it's difficult. If they don't have the ability to teach, then where are they going to get it? And then where's the responsibility of the school? And then you have all this politics. Unfortunately, I mean, we can go. There's a whole podcast, multiple podcasts
That's another
about the
episode.
kid. Yeah,
Yeah, and truly, the biggest gift that you can give to the world is to heal yourself.
at a certain point, in my personal belief, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but this is what I personally believe. We all have to take self responsibility. And
Yeah.
yes, a lot of messed up things happened to a lot of people out there. But at some point, where are you going to take responsibility for what you need to do to get past it? Or are you going to use that as a crutch for the rest of your life?
Agreed. So, entheogens, a valuable tool, but not the only tool in the kit, I guess we could say in
Sure.
closing. So, I think that'll wrap up for today. We have a really cool episode that's coming up next. We're going to host Rocky Rogio, who is the director of a new film called 1946. And this explores a mistranslation that happened in the Bible in the year 1946 and the cultural repercussions that extend out from it. I'm very excited to have our next guest for the next episode. So stay tuned for more and stay conscious. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.